Order, please. We'd like to begin with the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll distribute copies of my statement for the benefit of the critics. I believe they've received it already. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to take a few moments to address my colleagues about the recent flooding. Mr. Speaker, the last weeks have shown us the power of nature in all its fury. We have watched as extreme weather conditions tore a destructive path across the province, resulting in the tragic loss of 2 lives. Mr. Speaker, we have watched as flooding destroyed and damaged the provincial road and bridge infrastructure in every part of this province. Mr. Speaker, my department estimates that the flooding closed or damaged 200 roads and 47 bridges across Nova Scotia. The cost to our provincial infrastructure is estimated at $12 million. Countless more dollars will be spent on losses to personal property as Nova Scotians deal with their flood-damaged homes and add up the mounting cost. Mr. Speaker, it has been a week of tragedy and loss. However, Mr. Speaker, it has also been an incredible week of giving and sacrifice.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Transportation is making a statement, and he's in competition with a number of other members in the House. I would ask members to please turn it down a little bit, please. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Speaker, it has been an incredible week of giving and sacrifice. Nova Scotians have responded to this disaster with compassion, determination, and kindness. The collective efforts of paid and volunteer organizations allowed us to overcome the obstacles and respond in a way that minimized the destruction as much as was humanly possible. In many respects, Mr. Speaker, the groups are too countless to mention. However, I will try to give you a sense of those who participated. Volunteered firefighters, local Red Cross, emergency measures organization staff, ground search and rescue, local contractors, police, fire, and ambulance personnel, town and municipal staff, and transportation and public works crews worked through the night to protect motorists and save roads and bridges. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to mention the local volunteers and residents who helped out during the flooding. Many Nova Scotians helped neighbours and provided hot meals and clean clothes. Others provided assistance as needed, including warm blankets for an injured transportation and public works backhoe operator. These countless acts of kindness may never be written down, but they will be remembered by those who received them. They bring into focus the caring nature of our province and the value that make us strong. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to depart from my text because since the text was prepared, I had occasion to visit one home, and I'd like to recount a very short story, which was one home of one couple in the Pinehurst area. And they told a story of how a neighbor put a life jacket on and a rope around his waist and waded through the torrential floodwaters to rescue their pets, which were stranded in the home. And that is one of the kinds of acts of compassion and caring that I'm talking about. Mr. Speaker, I commend the efforts of many and the way they responded to the disaster with compassion, assistance, and determination of spirit. Mr. Speaker, the collective efforts of numerous groups and individuals will long be remembered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for providing the text of his comments, and especially that aside, and I know how important it is in that community. I too, Mr. Speaker, can speak of personal occasions of sacrifice in the community that I represent, in particular the Prospect Road Fire Department and the bridge that was literally blown out by the water on the Linwood Drive area of the community of Brookside. I particularly want to thank the Department of Transportation out of the Beachville base. The professionalism of the people who arrived in to put that new bridge in very quick order. To the people that I met who were there, who came from other areas of the province, whether it was EMO or the Department of Transportation, I surely do appreciate their cooperation. I too can mention an aside of Ken Saxton, who went out of his way because there was no way for those 35 people to get to and from school or to and from work, that he went down and with his good graces, he built a bridge so that people could get across before, of course, vehicles were permitted. But you know, at the same time, I want to point out to this government that the municipal affairs critic of our party has called upon that government to help out the people in Kentville right now to make sure that the $45 fee for the hookup of Nova Scotia Power will not be laid on those people, because the EMO decision made was a correct one to disconnect the power. Well, now let's allow those people not to be charged that $45 for the reconnection. But you know, we have to become more proactive with this issue, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you that because I grew up in a floodplain. I know what the Tantamar Marshes were all about, and I know the member from Truro Bible Hill can say the same thing. With the extremes we have now in weather, we have to truly have a rainy day fund. And it would seem to me that this government should follow the example of the Climate Change Fund from the government of Manitoba, that has allocated $730,000, and they have approved over 37 projects to look at the issue of climate change in that particular province. No longer can we say, well, that was a once in 50 years flood. With the extremes of global warming, with the extremes that we have in weather, we have to make sure that we truly do set aside a rainy day fund. You know, it's no way to have a joke in here, as the Minister of Environment and Labour did the other day, about global warming. It's become a real issue, and there must be certain proactive steps taken, and I would encourage this government to look at the Manitoba example and to look at it so that we're not always reacting to such disasters, but we have plans in place ahead of time. For example, the dike work of the Truro floodplain has to be looked at. And it's not an issue that we should be reacting to. It's an issue the Department of Environment and Labour, in combination with the Department of Public Works, should be looking forward to and looking at possible solutions in advance. The inconvenience, the disastrous deaths of those poor folk on the South Shore, they are terrible things for our province to face. But this government has a responsibility to show some leadership and should follow the example of the Manitoba government by establishing a climate change fund, taking on projects so that we can be ready for such disasters, because, Mr. Speaker, they're inevitable. They're going to happen with global warming, and those of us near the ocean are well aware of the torrential power of floods when they do arrive. Thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for providing a copy of his announcement prior to the commencement of the House. But that's about as positive as it's going to get, unfortunately, because after reading today's paper, where I see that the province is siphoning off $9 of $11 million of federal money that was slated for housing, you wonder if maybe this is where the provincial government is getting the money for their EMO program. Mr. Speaker, you know that this is the only province in Canada that doesn't even get its base funding, sufficient base funding? It's the only province, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't get the allowable funding for EMO that it's entitled to. And why, Mr. Speaker? Because of the ineptitude of this government and this minister, who we're not sure who's speaking for EMO at this point. Mr. Speaker, I will even table the document that shows that they are not even getting their base funding for EMO under what they call JEP, Joint Emergency Preparedness Program. Mr. Speaker, they can't even get the bare minimum dollars that they're entitled to because they haven't even asked for it. You wonder why we're in a crisis situation when things like this happen in Nova Scotia. And what's the provincial government doing? They're siphoning off money from other programs which are federal dollars, so that they can take the credit for all the good things that they're doing. Well, Mr. Speaker, the people of Nova Scotia will not be fooled. Why, Mr. Speaker, is the government hiding the report on bridges in Nova Scotia? Because they don't want people to know how bad it is. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bridges are in dire need of repair. Some of them have been identified, whether the government likes to admit it or not, are in critical need of repair to the point where they shouldn't even be used. And what's the government doing? They're hiding under the Freedom of Information. So, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation and Public Works can get up and wax eloquence about somebody tying a piece of rope around their waist, and that's important in an emergency situation, but that's no way for this government or that minister to respond to emergencies in this province by giving people pieces of rope to save themselves. Mr. Speaker, he can do much better than that, than those type of little analogies that he has put here before. We're not interested in that. We're interested in action and putting some money on the table to help these people. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister responsible for EMO.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to share with you and my colleagues here in the House today's announcement on the launch of a specialty conservation license plate for motor vehicles during National Wildlife Week. This attractive plate, featuring the piping plover, will help raise money for species at risk conservation. Here in Nova Scotia, we currently have 20 wildlife species, including the piping plover, the pink coreopsis, the Atlantic whitefish, and American martin, listed as species at risk under the province's Endangered Species Act. This law provides protection for these species and their habitats, and also provides for a fund to support conservation activities. Mr. Speaker, the Species at Risk Conservation Fund will be used to support the development of status reports, species recovery activities, habitat conservation, as well as research and education for species at risk. An important aspect of this fund is its accessibility to Nova Scotians. Project proposals will be invited from conservation groups and the public. Of course, a fund of any type requires ongoing financial contributions to keep it going. That is why I'm so pleased to announce today the launch of the new Conservation License Plate Program. Through the purchase of a license plate, Nova Scotians are able to contribute $50 directly to the fund and provide support for species at risk. I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, did you want to see a copy of this, or I'll table it? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Hants East, in response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the minister for his statement in advance. And you know, Mr. Speaker, one of the things people ask me, they ask me a lot of things about my job as an MLA, and I have for some time been able to say that I'm not a cynic. But we're starting to push that envelope, I got to say, right now. The minister, who I think I'm going to start to regard as the minister of ministerial statements, is coming up with something that I hope will be a goodwill announcement. But I want to tell the minister that I looked at the number of species at risk in this province. I got them listed here. There are 20 species at risk in Nova Scotia. 10 of those have become at risk since 2001. 6 of those in 2001, 4 of those in 2002. So I want to say to the minister, who is the Minister of Natural Resources, that in a province that clear cuts 100,000 acres a year, that you want to promote saving these species by a license plate, that $50 will go into a fund. Well, I would like to see more information in your statements, and if I watch the news tonight, I might get it, because I never seem to get it here in the House. But the question of whether or not this will actually get used for this purpose, how it's going to be administered, whether the license plate price goes up by $50, none of this has been explained in this statement. We had people in this gallery the other day who were protesting Black Bull Resources and its mining operation, or proposed mining operation, so close to the Tobiatic. And they're concerned about the moose population in the Tobiatic. Well, you know what? That's the only indigenous moose population in this province, because the moose in Cape Breton came from Alberta. The only Nova Scotia moose in the mainland is there. Now, I want to tell the minister that population is threatened. It's not on your list. And if the minister wanted to be proactive, and try to save any of these species, he'd examine the clear-cutting regulations in this province, how we harvest timber. He'd actually raise the stumping fees to a point where they're competitive and put some of that money into conserving habitat and wildlife. The same as he might do when it comes to licensing, etc., for mining operations or any of those operations that take away from habitat. So, along with what may seem to the minister to be a highly negative comment on my part, I want to say, if this helps, I certainly would be supportive of it. But I think there are so many more concrete things that the minister could be doing that would actually have a positive benefit for these species at risk, and I'd like to see the minister go down that road. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm glad the Minister got his scolding already today, so I'll go a little easier on him. I want to thank the Minister for sending us over the statement as usual, as he generally does, and that's, it's very good to have it before we come to the House, Mr. Speaker. This is a good announcement today. It's good, but has it gone far enough? I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker. It has gone far enough as far as the taxpayer of Nova Scotia is concerned, but what is the government putting into it? That's the question, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, endangered species in Nova Scotia require support, and they require monetary support. The big concern, Mr. Speaker, that I see with this announcement today is the fact that the non-profit organisations is picking up the tab for this, Mr. Speaker. And there's nothing in this statement that indicates to any group or any Nova Scotian how much the government is paying in. We know they're going to pay $50 for a plate. But is the government going to match that $50, which they do in a lot of programs, or which they should do with a lot of programs across the province, if they're going to be sincere in conservation and the efforts of conserving our endangered species? Mr. Speaker, we all support the conservation measures that the government take and that they do. But, Mr. Speaker, we can't expect Nova Scotians to pick up the tab for everything. So, while the announcement is it's a good measure, Mr. Speaker, but again, the slack that the government faces is they're trying to have the taxpayer pick it up, or the non-profit organisations. Again, I support the measure, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister, but we all support conservation measures, but only when the government provides adequate support to a follow-up and showing leadership in this effort, Mr. Speaker.
Are there further statements by ministers? Order, please. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in February, Nova Scotia has lost a strong public activist with the passing of Ruth Johnson, known by her friends and family as Dr. Ruth. And whereas Dr. Ruth, a former resident of Africville, worked for over 60 years on behalf of her community, which in turn helped build a stronger Nova Scotia. And whereas her personal excellence in life was also awarded with an honorary Doctor of Letters from Mount St. Vincent University, therefore be it resolved that the members of this legislature join me in recognizing the significant contributions made by Ruth Johnson and express our condolences to her family and friends. Mr. Speaker, I move passage with...
Minister's requested waivers. Agreed? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas approximately 85% of all physician decisions regarding diagnosis and treatment are based in laboratory test results performed by medical laboratory professionals, and whereas medical laboratory professionals are Canada's third largest group of healthcare professionals, yet the profession faces a serious human resource shortage within the next 3 to 5 years. And whereas the province has purchased 22 additional seats of New Brunswick Community College training program to train additional medical laboratory professionals, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing the work of medical laboratory technologists and acknowledging National Medical Laboratory Week, April 7th to 11th. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 6th to 12th is National Wildlife Week, a week when all Nova Scotians and Canadians are asked to celebrate our natural heritage and to play a part in its conservation. And whereas this year's theme is Native Species, Nature's Choice, and the week will focus on the harmful impacts of invasive alien species on Canada's environment, and whereas throughout the nation, activities commemorating National Wildlife Week include nature walks, habitat improvement projects, and tree and flower plantings, therefore be it resolved that members of this House recognize that our wildlife are important natural resources and that require protection, and take time during National Wildlife Week to think about what our natural resources mean to each one of us. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The Minister requested waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Tourism and Culture and Minister of Health Promotion.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this year's World Health Day, Healthy Environments for Children, provides an opportunity to bring attention to the dangers children face in their environment. Whereas each year at the IWK Health Centre alone, more than 5,000 children visit the emergency department as a result of an injury. And whereas Child Safety Link, a community-based program, promotes a vision of safe communities where children can grow to reach their full potential. And Mr. Speaker, before I do the therefore be it resolved, I'd ask those who I'll be introducing in my resolution to stand who are in the Speaker's gallery as I say their name and to receive the warm welcome of the House. Therefore be it resolved that members of the legislature join me in recognizing World Health Day and the IWK representatives with us here in the gallery today. Jane Mealy, Heather McKay, Kim Pittman, Sandra Newton, Lauren Cardiff, and Kate Mahone. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that they receive the warm welcome of the House. Thank you. And just as a side note, Mr. Speaker, we signed a proclamation earlier with the Premier as well. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The Minister's requested waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried, and yes, indeed, welcome to our guests in the gallery. Introduction of bills. Notices of motion. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 4th, the Education Minister attacked the federal Liberal student loan policy because, quote, in many cases, parents deplete their savings and accumulate debt to finance post-secondary studies for their children. And whereas the Conservative government knows all about how to force people to deplete their savings, because that's exactly what it does to seniors in nursing homes, and whereas after the Premier told seniors they suffered this harsh treatment because the government had no money, his government underspent its budget for long-term care, and today announced that they will keep taking senior savings until the year 2007. Therefore, be it resolved that the Ham Conservatives should clean up their own backyard and stop forcing seniors to deplete their life savings before they start a crusade against similar practices of other governments. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver's been asked for. Is it agreed? No. I hear several no's. The Honourable, the Leader in the House of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Conservative government has spent its 4 years in office blaming the federal government for not providing its share of funding for provincial programs. And whereas in reality, it is the Conservative government that skimmed $6 million of the federal Millennium Scholarship Foundation awards and reduced the province's share of health care funding and replaced it with federal funding. And whereas now the Conservatives are up to their old tricks again, skimming $9 million off the $11 million in federal funding for social housing programs. Therefore, it be resolved that it has been the Conservative government that has not provided its fair share of funding for Nova Scotians, not the federal government. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
The member has asked for waiver. I hear quite a few no's. The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lunenburg Daycare Centre has been providing quality child care in the town of Lunenburg since February of 1973, and whereas Joan Lance has been director of the Lunenburg Daycare Centre since it began operation in 1973, and whereas Joan Lance is retiring or has retired as the director of the Lunenburg Daycare Centre after 30 years of excellent service to its children. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House thank Joan for the excellent service she has provided to the Lunenburg Daycare Centre over the past 30 years and wish her all of the best on her retirement. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver's request is agreed. It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'll be seeking waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give resolution that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a devastating fire at Gottingen and Falkland Streets in Halifax on February the 26th destroyed several buildings and resulted in some 20 people being left homeless with the loss of all their personal possessions. And whereas individuals and organizations in the community rallied together to provide aid and assistance in various ways to those dispossessed by the fire, and whereas some individuals and organizations held very successful benefits to raise money for the Halifax Fire Relief Fund to help those left homeless and bereft, therefore, be it resolved that this House thank all those who did so much for the victims of the February 26th Gottingen Street fire, including Chris Lloyd and Craig Ferguson at the Khyber Centre for the Arts, and Greg Clark, David Henry, and Victor Siperick at the Marquee Club in Hell's Kitchen, as well as Club NRG. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Members requested waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice in future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in a matter of months we have seen this Tory government go from creating an Office of Health Promotion with great fanfare to giving the office an embarrassingly brief paragraph in its throne speech. And whereas the marketing efforts may indicate that the Tory government is committed to health promotion, a review of the inadequate funding level clearly demonstrated this is not a priority. Whereas the only physical activity we've seen from this Tory government is how they continue to fiddle away and dance around this important issue. Therefore, be resolved that if this government is truly committed to health promotion, it will recognize that what will improve the health of Nova Scotians is strategic plans and improved funding, not public relations exercise of issuing press releases. Ask for waiver of notice.
Members requested waivers. Is it agreed? I hear some noes. The notice is tabled. The Honourable, the member for Guysborough, Port Hawkesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Stan Rogers is an East Coast cultural icon and Canadian folk music hero, penning many classic songs in his short career. And whereas one of the first independent artists to significantly impact Canadian music, Mr. Rogers died in a plane accident in 1983 at the age of 33, leaving friends, family, and fans from St. John's to Victoria devastated. And whereas you can help the petition to induct this honored musician into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame by visiting www.geist.com, Stan Rogers, and register your support for the Canada's folk legend. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the important influence Stan Rogers has had on the East Coast music industry and wish the organizers of the petition luck as they aim to have Stan Rogers inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
The member is requesting waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteer firefighters have been amongst the longest serving and most dedicated of volunteers, and whereas rural fire departments and community safety are by and large dependent on volunteers, and whereas last January Mr. Albert Hanna stepped down as chief of the Maitland Fire Department after serving many years in that capacity, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Albert Hanna for his service to his community as former chief of the Maitland Fire Department and the leadership he provided in making the Maitland community a safer place to live. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister for the Department of Environment and Labour appointed a committee to perform a comprehensive review of the Environment Act in January of 2000, and whereas this committee submitted a report in October of 2000 containing 46 recommendations on how the Minister could improve the Environment Act, and whereas to date neither the Honourable Member for Hants West or his predecessor, the Honourable Member for Kings South, have bothered to implement any of these recommendations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the lack of concern shown towards the environment by this government and encourage them to at least consider implementing some of these changes by the volunteer committee.
The notice is tabled. The Honourable, the member for Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 50 years ago this year, the co-inventor of insulin, Dr. Charles Best, recognized the need for a national organization to support the growing number of Canadians with diabetes. And whereas the Port Williams, Kings County native founded the Canadian Diabetes Association to support diabetes research, education, and advocacy. And whereas more than 50,000 Nova Scotians diagnosed with diabetes now benefit from Dr. Best's vision. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing the significant contributions of Dr. Charles Best to the health and well-being of all Canadians, particularly those with diabetes, and extend our congratulations to the Canadian Diabetes Association on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
The member requested waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteer fire departments have been over the years prevented much loss of life and property, and as a consequence have saved insurers from paying out a lot of expensive claims. Whereas, imagine their surprise that when the volunteer fire department in Port Hastings learned while they were out fighting a fire at a local motel that their insurer, Royal and Sun Alliance, had canceled their coverage and that of 34 other volunteer departments in Nova Scotia. And whereas the Port Hastings Volunteer Fire Department has found another company willing to provide coverage, but at more than double the cost. Therefore, be it resolved that when private insurers are even putting the screws to the very people that save them countless dollars, the volunteer fire departments, it's time for the government to intervene and ensure that loss of insurance and skyrocketing insurance premiums do not hinder the dedicated volunteer fire departments in this province. I seek waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
The member seeking waiver notice. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Governor General Adrian Clarkson has presented RCMP Deputy Commissioner J. Terry Ryan, Inspector Ronald Keith Sherwood, Inspector Robert Purcell, Assistant Commissioner Dwight Bishop, as well as Chief Edgar McLeod of the Cape Breton Regional Police Service with the Order of Merit of the Police Forces at a ceremony at Rideau Hall. And whereas Assistant Commissioner Bishop and Chief McLeod have been appointed officers, Deputy Commissioner Ryan was named Commander, while Inspectors Purcell and Sherwood have been named members of the Order of Merit of Police Forces. And whereas these awards are to recognize Canadian police officers whose contributions and dedication to law enforcement have exceeded protection of the community. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate these police officers and recognize their contributions to our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The Honourable Member is requesting waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Dance Society held its annual Flying Scots Special Events competition on January 25th, and whereas Pictou County was well represented at this event, with Highland dancers participating in a variety of dance categories, including the Sailor's Hornpipe, the Highland Fling, and the Sword Dance. Whereas Anna Matheson, Eve McKay, Kelsey McKenzie, Hannah McTire, Janelle Langell, Harmony Wilson, Gwen Henderson, Alison Smith all brought home awards. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating all the winners of the Flying Scots Special Events competition. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
The member's requesting waivers. Agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Metropolitan Regional Housing Authority has a waiting list of 1,300 people who need public housing, and whereas the waiting period is up to 2 years for families who need affordable shelter, and whereas in spite of this pressing need, this government has squirreled away $9 million of the $11 million federal dollars intended for social housing. Therefore, be it resolved that this House calls on the Minister of Community Service to target all of the $11 million of federal money for social housing at the construction of new and maintenance of old housing units or form of subsidies for families to offset the ever-increasing cost for rent of private housing. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on March 4, 2002, the Premier told a local newspaper, quote, "To be sure, there are some people who suggest that government should continue borrowing on its debt and spending beyond its means. I don't believe there is merit to this argument." End quote. And whereas somewhere between then and now the Premier has decided that it is now okay to continue to borrow and spend beyond his means. Whereas during the last election, the Premier also said he would run a government of honesty and integrity. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House recognize that the Premier has been inconsistent on his borrowing promise, which continues to cast a long shadow on the credibility of the Premier.
The notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Sackville Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sackville Blazers hockey team recently captured the Nova Scotia Junior B title in a hard-fought battle, And whereas this victory earned them a berth in the Don Johnson Atlantic Championship Cup in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland this weekend. And whereas this weekend the Blazers were victorious with a 5-0 record, defeating the host Mount Pearl Junior Blades in a back-and-forth battle for the title. Therefore, be it resolved, this host congratulate the Blazers in their first Don Johnson Cup. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
Waivers request agreed. It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this winter's hockey season is rapidly drawing to a conclusion and minor hockey champions are being declared these last 2 weeks, and whereas the Cole Harbour minor hockey system is on a par with any developmental organization in Nova Scotia, and whereas the proof is in the pudding, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as the Cole Harbour Red Wings prevailed to win the Nova Scotia Pee Wee AAA Hockey Championship. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Coach Chad Trenholm, his assistants, and his young charges on the Cole Harbour Red Wings on winning the Nova Scotia Pee Wee AAA Hockey Championship. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver of notice has been asked for. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice in future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League has recently honoured its top players at their annual awards banquet in Montreal, with many of the Halifax Mooseheads taking centre stage. Whereas Sean McKenzie of the Halifax Moosehead has been named the Quebec Major Junior League's Coach of the Year. And whereas, not to be outdone by their coach, the players on the Halifax Mooseheads were also the recipients of many awards. Petra Varna received top rookie and all rookie team honors. A.J. McLean shared the humanitarian award with David Massé of the Quebec Remparts, while defenseman Jimmy Sherrill was named to the all-rookie team. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate these Halifax Moosehead players and coach, and wish the team every success in their quest for the championships. I ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Antigonish.
Speaker, I hereby give notice of a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Heather Jackson from North Grant received the highest marks in Nova Scotia on the Chartered Accountant exams in 2002 and placed 10th in Canada, and whereas a graduate of the class of 2000 from St. FX earning a degree in business administration with honors in marketing, Ms. Jackson received the Governor General Gold Medal for attaining the highest average over 3 years. And whereas for placing first in Nova Scotia, Ms. Jackson will receive the Centennial Gold Medal and the Harry G. Hoban Memorial Prize for top marks in Atlantic Canada. And therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Heather Jackson on achieving first-ranked scores on her Chartered Accountant exams and wish her continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The Minister of Education is requesting waiver of notice. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Timberley Prospect.
Mr. Speaker, and I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas an appreciation of our historical past allows us to more fully understand the present, whereas author Bill Giroir of Brookside has published the first of a 4-book series called Acadian Awakening. Whereas this labor of love is a culmination of many years of work and dedication by Mr. Giroir, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Bill Giroir of Brookside on the publication of Acadia Awakenings with best wishes for a great future in his future endeavors. I ask for a waiver. Passage without debate.
Waivers requested. Agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for generations, science fairs have been an outlet for many Nova Scotian students to have hands-on experience with various aspects of science and to display their scientific knowledge. And whereas last Thursday, April 3rd, 2003, 116 Barrington High School students ranging from grade 7 through to grade 12 took part in the school's science fair organized by grade 9 teacher Lynn Fraser. And whereas the top 30 displays as judged by community members will advance to the district science fair in Yarmouth on April 11th, where the top 3 displays will travel to Calgary for the Canada-wide science fair. Therefore, be it resolved, members of this House congratulate the students of Barrington High, as well as all Nova Scotia students taking part in science fairs throughout this province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice in the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Special Olympic Society held its annual Sports Celebrity Festival Dinner and Gala on April the 3rd, and whereas the fundraising event supports Nova Scotia Special Olympians in day-to-day programming or when they compete at provincial, national, or international events, and whereas our Special Olympians continue to demonstrate world-class dedication, commitment, and ability and are true champions of challenge. Therefore, be resolved that all members recognize the dedication and the commitments of our Special Olympians and congratulate and thank the Nova Scotia Special Olympic Society for its continuing efforts to support these special athletes. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice. The question be put without debate.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Captain William Spry Community Centre in Spryfield provides facilities for a wide range of activities, including the library, fitness centre, pool, and community meeting rooms. Whereas the Board of Directors has always fostered involvement with the great number of community groups operating in the area. Whereas this board hosted a very successful community information sharing meeting on Saturday, April the 5th, to provide an opportunity for groups, agencies, and volunteers to become better informed about the services offered to residents. Therefore, be it resolved, this House commend and congratulate the Captain William Spry staff for their initiative in outreach to the community of Spryfield. And I seek waiver of notice.
The member for Halifax Atlantic is seeking waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. I'd like to read this on behalf of my colleague, the MLA from Colchester North. Whereas the Better Business Bureau annually recognizes companies making contributions to charitable and non-profit organizations in their community, and whereas the award winners are chosen based on their long-term commitment to the Better Business Bureau and the level of community activity performed by the company, and whereas Harris Home Centre of Truro has received the Better Business Bureau Community Achievement Award. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House congratulate the owners and staff of Harris's Home Centre on the receipt of their Better Business Bureau Award and wish them continued success in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver.
Waivers requested. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will be seeking waiver. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas St. Joseph's Early Childhood Education Centres have been centres of excellence in quality childcare for many years, and whereas the children who attend, their families, staff, and board members remember fondly their association with St. Joseph's, and whereas on March the 26th, 2003, St. Joseph's Early Childhood Centres celebrated its 35th anniversary with many well-wishers thankful for the continued success of this excellent program. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate St. Joseph's Early Childhood Centres on the anniversary of their 35 years of superb services to children and their parents, and thank all the board members, staff, and families who over the years have contributed to the success of this excellent program. And I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
The members requesting waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Irondale Theatre Ensemble has been providing exciting, stimulating, and challenging theatre throughout metro and rural areas for over 11 years. Whereas this distinguished theatre company does public performances of original company creative works, adaptations of classic texts, and dance theatre pieces, as well as working with the Department of Education to deliver important messages to school children throughout the province. Whereas Irondale Theatre has demonstrated its commitment to the community even further through its arts and educational programs by hosting open workshops on Thursday nights to allow everyone an opportunity to enjoy the social interaction while participating in creating theatre. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate the ensemble members, artists, support staff, and volunteers for their outstanding efforts to make and nurture links to the diverse population of Nova Scotia through its educational and theatrical works, and I seek waiver of notice.
Agreed.
The honourable member requested waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. Are there further note? Yes, the honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas recycling is an important waste management strategy, and whereas learning the value of recycling at an early stage of life will only benefit young people in our communities, and whereas this past January the Rawdon Elementary School students won several honours at the annual Northern Region Recycles Day celebration held in the Riverside Education Centre in Milford. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the students of Rawdon Elementary School for their achievements in making Nova Scotia a cleaner place to live and for the recognitions brought to them because of their accomplishments at the annual Northern Region Recycles Day. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Waterford Consolidated Hospital is a 24-bed facility housing acute and continuing care services to residents in the Waterford and area. And whereas the District Health Authority has been in need of an MRI equipment, leaving patients to have to undergo long waiting periods before traveling to Halifax. And whereas the DHA recently received a donation of $50,000 from the Waterford Consolidated Hospital Charitable Foundation to help purchase an MRI and bone densitometer. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House commend the Waterford Consolidated Hospital Charity Foundation and the citizens of the Waterford area for their generosity and their dedicated efforts to raise funds for a much-needed MRI and bone densitometer. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
One of the honourable member's colleagues is saying it was too long. However, he's asking waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Regional Residential Services Society has begun to move residents of group homes into alternate facilities, including the Nova Scotia Hospital, in anticipation of a labour dispute, and whereas the workers in the homes and the families of residents are concerned that moving these residents is throwing their lives into disarray, and particularly for those who are being moved into the Nova Scotia Hospital, creating a fear of being institutionalized. And whereas this anxiety could be prevented if the government would provide adequate targeting funding to the Regional Residential Services Society so that it could meet the workers' reasonable request of wage parity with their counterparts in hospitals. Therefore, be it resolved that this House call upon the Minister of Community Services to ensure the safety and comfort of the residents of group homes by providing adequate funding to the Regional Residential Services Society so that it can provide workers with wage parity with hospital workers. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
The member is requesting waiver of notice. Is it agreed? I hear some no's. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Timberley residents John Feetham and Barb Shanks have provided valuable leadership to the Glengarry Estates Homeowners Association, whereas this action group continues to represent the views of residents on numerous topics of concern. Whereas the Glengarry Estates area will be a better, safer place to live because of the efforts of these volunteers. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize the efforts of Barb Shanks, John Feetham, and the Glengarry Estates Homeowners Association and thank them for their dedication. I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Members requesting waivers, it agreed. It is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. No further notices of motion. Orders of the day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House on estimates.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise in this estimates debate. I have been pleased to represent the constituency of Halifax Fairview since March 6, 2001. Halifax Fairview is a constituency that has had a tradition of strong representation. My predecessor as the MLA for that riding, of course, was the Honourable Eileen O'Connell, well-known, well-respected on all sides of this House, who tragically passed away in September of 2000. Before Eileen was Alexa McDonough. And, Mr. Speaker, Alexa is very well respected, well regarded in the constituency. Anybody who doubts that should perhaps canvass door to door with her in Fairview, as I've had the privilege to do, to see the high regard with which she is held by the people of Fairview, on whose behalf she worked for many years. There are parts of the riding, in fact, that Alexa has represented for over 20 years, and she is very well known and well regarded by the people in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, the constituency of Halifax Fairview is, one of the interesting things about it is there's no one thing that you can say about it that is true of the whole constituency. It's not rich, although there are parts of it that are very well off, and it's not poor, although there are parts of the constituency where there is a great deal of poverty. There are many seniors, particularly in the Fairview part of the constituency, and there are many young families as well, many families who've been here for a long time, and many families who've just moved to Halifax, typically from somewhere else in Nova Scotia, although there are people, I've met people in my travels who've come from all across Canada and all around the world. Mr. Speaker, there's a very large and growing immigrant community. I've been told by someone from the Metro Immigrant Settlement Association that it is the most popular area for new immigrants to settle, because no matter what country people come from, they can always find someone from their homeland, someone with whom they can relate as they try and integrate into Canada. And that's a very special part of the constituency, is the multicultural aspect of it as people come from all over the world. If I could sum up Halifax Fairview in one word, it would be hardworking. These are the people who keep the city of Halifax going, who keep the institutions of the Halifax Regional Municipality going. You're far more likely to find a nurse or a lab technician than you are to find a surgeon. You're much more likely to find a bank teller than you are to find a bank vice president. You're much more likely to find a teacher or custodian than you are to find a school superintendent. These are the people who plug away day after day after day. They pay their taxes day after day after day, and they expect a high quality of public services in return for themselves and for their families. Mr. Speaker, during the campaign when I was elected, and every day since then, I've been mindful of the pledge that I made to my constituents, which was in my campaign literature and has been on my MLA website since the day I was elected. It is, in a sense, my mission statement as an MLA, and it reads as follows. My pledge to my constituents. On March 6, 2001, you honored me with the great privilege and responsibility of being your representative in the legislature. My promise to you is that I will work with integrity, energy, and commitment to serve you, to be your voice in the legislature, to be your advocate in government, and most importantly, to work with you to build this community and this province. Mr. Speaker, that is the standard by which I hope I will be judged by my constituents. Have I lived up to that, or have I not? And, Mr. Speaker, that is the pledge that I'm going to be taking to the doorsteps of Halifax Fairview in the next election. I've also told my constituents, Mr. Speaker, and I am absolutely clear that I'm going to keep to this promise, that no one is going to outwork me. No one's going to outwork me on the campaign trail. Nobody is going to outwork me as an MLA. And that is one promise, Mr. Speaker, that I know I'm going to keep. Mr. Speaker, as the MLA, very important part of what I do, am able to do on behalf of my constituents, is to be their advocate in government. My professional background is as a lawyer, and there's actually a great deal in common with a lawyer's work and that of an MLA. There's a great deal of similarity between lawyers who are practicing what some might call poverty law and the work of an MLA. Because the people, the poorest people, the people who most need help from their government are the ones with the fewest resources to deal with government when their government is causing them a problem. And so my role is to be their voice, to be their advocate. And some of my proudest moments as an MLA have not been in this House at all. They've been in the work that I've been able to do for an individual family in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, last week I had a good week. Two of my most complex cases resolved themselves happily. And long after I've forgotten what we were debating about in this sitting of the legislature, long after people have forgotten what I've done here, I will remember the casework that I was able to do to make a difference in the lives of individual families, because that's why I was elected. That's what I was elected to do. One of the cases was a workers' compensation case, a gentleman who was hurt, believe it or not, in 1997. And after a great deal of difficulty and heartache for himself and his family, he came into my office in December of 2000. And ever since then, we've been dealing with the Workers' Compensation Board, trying to get his claim accepted, working through the appeal system. And I was very proud that last week, the appeal decision finally came down that was 100% in his favor. His claim was allowed, causation was established, his pre-injury earnings were accepted, and the periods for which he was claiming were accepted, Mr. Speaker. And so I was very pleased that that family and I were able to work together to a successful resolution. Another case that I worked on that came to a happy resolution actually ended up on page 1 of the Herald last week, and some members may remember seeing the couple where the wife is very ill. She's really terminally ill, but she holds a taxi owner's license that her husband uses to make a living, and the only thing they asked for was to transfer the license from her name to his name, so that if she passes away, he will still be able to earn his livelihood. But the city said no. And their city councillor wasn't able to help. And so they came to me, and together, working cooperatively, we were able to bring it to a successful resolution by going to court and getting a court order ordering the city to make the transfer. And long after I'm forgotten here, and long after I've forgotten what I've done here, I will be very proud of the work that I was able to do for that family and other families like them. And, Mr. Speaker, some of the other things I've been able to work on as an MLA, simple things like getting a fence for School Avenue. School Avenue, which all the members in this House have seen but may not have noticed. As you're coming down the Bicentennial Highway into the city, there's a residential street right on your left. And that street is closer to a 100 series highway than any other residential street in the HRM, so I'm told. And working cooperatively with the Minister of Transportation, with his officials in the Department of Transportation and the city, we were able to make a difference on that street by putting up a new fence and some vegetation which will grow and provide some aesthetic improvement in their environment. I was able to work with residents of Elliott Street on getting rid of some graffiti. I've been able to work with Nova Scotians from across the province on the issue of unfair ambulance fees, something on which this government still refuses to budge. But, Mr. Speaker, on every single case that I took on where we said to the government, we are not going to pay these bills, the government has given up its collection efforts. And so, Mr. Speaker, that was with 7 test cases, and if I have to take on another 7 or another 70 or another 700 until this government changes its unfair ambulance fee policy, I will do that, Mr. Speaker, because that's what I was elected to do. I was pleased to be able to work with the residents of the Fairmount subdivision as contaminated land near their homes was cleaned up. I'm pleased to work with the residents of Fairview to try and solve the issue of jake brakes, which are used on the highway beside their homes and which reverberates throughout the community of Fairview. And working again with the Department of Transportation, hope to be able to solve that problem. Mr. Speaker, what I will do if the voters of Halifax Fairview decide that they want me to come back to this legislature, I will continue to work as hard as I can and as effectively as I can to address their concerns, to address their needs, to address the needs of today's families, Mr. Speaker. Today's seniors need a break, and my job is to make sure that they get it. Today's students need a break, and my job is to make sure that they get it. I want to talk particularly about seniors who have been so badly dealt with by this government, Mr. Speaker, that in order to deal once and for all with the issue of seniors having their assets taken in order to get into long-term care facilities, Mr. Speaker, I will work on that until that issue is solved. And one promise I will make to the government and to this Minister of Health is it will be solved before the year 2007. I want to work to reduce the burden put on our seniors by pharmacare fees. I want to work to make sure their health care system is there for them when they need it, and they don't have to wait unconscionable lengths of time in order to access it. I'm going to work on the auto insurance issue, Mr. Speaker, because seniors in Nova Scotia are being discriminated against in the provision of auto insurance. Every member of this House knows it. The challenge is what are we going to do about it, Mr. Speaker? And if I am returned to this House, I will work every day to make sure that that discrimination stops. Mr. Speaker, I want to address the needs of today's students, to address the quality of education, because, Mr. Speaker, for no other reason, this September, my son, my oldest son, will be entering the public school system. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that he and every child his age, every child in Nova Scotia gets the best education that's possible to give them. I want to tackle the issue of post-secondary tuition. When I graduated from university here in Nova Scotia, Dalhousie University, in 1989, I graduated with a debt of $10,000 after 3 years of student loans, and that, Mr. Speaker, is less than a student today runs up in a single year. That issue has to be addressed, and I will do that if I'm returned to this House. I want to deal with auto insurance for families. I want to deal with the issue of HST and the necessities of life, because this government doesn't understand the crisis of home heating oil, doesn't understand the crisis caused by high gas prices or user fees, and it doesn't understand the very real poverty that is there in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, that is what I've done. That is what I will do.
The member's time has expired. The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity. Not an editorial comment this time, Honourable Member. This time I want to talk about a recent event that affected my riding, a very sad event that's hurt the lives and caused some great challenges for many people in my riding, as well as for other communities throughout Nova Scotia. But in particular, I want to speak about my riding because it was one of the ridings hardest hit by the floods recently. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, this is a very sad event and a challenging one that will affect the lives of these people long after the media attention has moved away. But it also does give me the opportunity to talk about the many volunteers in the town, the county, the Department of Transportation, the RCMP staff, and about the wonderful community that we have in Kings County and in the town of Kentville. Fred Scambatti, who's the editor for the Advertiser, had an editorial recently that I was quite intrigued by. I didn't realize he'd moved from Upper Canada to the area, but he talked about how much he enjoyed the sense of community and how much that meant to him, and over the years how he'd grown to appreciate that, and that the sense of community in Nova Scotia, particularly in Kings County and the town of Kentville, was second to none. In the old Judaic code, there's a passage, if there's anyone among you in need, a member of your community, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm very, very pleased and very, very happy that the people in my community, when this tragedy struck various members, were not hard-hearted, not tight-fisted. In fact, they're the very opposite. They went out of their way to help those who are in need and to open their homes, to provide whatever help they could provide. I was actually at a meeting trying to deal with the problem of smoking in high schools at the Berwick offices of the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board, and I got the call from Halls Harbour. Was when I first got the call of the massive flooding going on. They wanted me to come out and look at it. The councillor, Madonna Spinzola, and her husband, Dick Killam. Dick phoned me up. He's a volunteer firefighter with the Halls Harbour. And I went running out, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was like a mini Niagara Falls, and we were convinced that the whole causeway would go soon, the boats would be in trouble, and the communities would be cut off. From then on, as recently as today, this morning, I've had constant meetings with residents who are having to cope with the problems caused by the flooding. This morning it was with residents who are coping with the fact that their oil tanks were knocked over in the flood, causing environmental damage, and there's a question of remediation and getting back into their homes. I still have, as of today, 8 people who are not yet back in their homes, and hopefully by this evening that problem will be resolved. But the volunteers and the town and county staff have been superb, Mr. Speaker. I can't speak highly enough of them. The Mayor, Gary Pearl, has done yeoman service, has taken over sump pumps and personally helped people individually. He's chaired various meetings that I've been at, trying to get all of the various players together to make sure that help is coming. Bill Boyd, the CAO for the town. Bernie Cooper, who is the EMO officer for the town of Kentville, and he did such a wonderful job that, Mr. Speaker, I have forgiven him for all the parking tickets he gives me, because he's the bylaw enforcement officer as well, and he gives me more parking tickets. I think he sees my car and goes right to it with his little shotgun, but he did a fantastic job and coordinated the activity. Mr. Speaker, the town of Kentville received the highest marks in the analysis that my colleague, the Honourable Tim Olive's department, did on EMO preparedness, and well, I can see that they deserve that. Mark Phillips on the town staff, Wayne Gibbons, Charlene Brown, Hal Henderson, all these people did a wonderful job. In Kentville, Mr. Speaker, they've divided up the town into 6 different regions, and the area that was hit the worst is served by people such as Frank Simons, David Cunningham, and Linda Rankin. Frank Simons, I just talked to him this morning, and not only trying to help out his neighbors, but having to cope with his own home being flooded, and not sure if the insurance would cover it. He just got the news today that insurance will cover. He's one of the ones who has severe problems with the oil tank tipping out, not his own, but his neighbors who came across on his property. The Kentville Fire Department, I went in to see them on that Monday, and they were busy at work, all of them volunteers, and I can't speak enough. They opened up the Kentville Fire Department. The Red Cross staff were there with Richard Harvey to welcome people, and I was there when the first family came in, this mother with 3 young children, and they were scurrying around to try and get the TV going so the kids had something to watch in this room, and they had food there, and it was just a wonderful sort of activity. Richard Harvey, by the way, is from Kingsport, and he was one of the individuals who went down to New York City and helped out there after the September 11th, and was recognized for his service to the people of New York on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia. But getting back to the fire department, they were there 24 hours throughout the day. Sean Ripley, the fire chief, can't speak highly enough of him. Sean Ripley, by the way, is Don Ripley's son. Don Ripley wrote a very interesting book about political life in Nova Scotia, and thankfully we've progressed since then from what Don was writing about under... it was more Reagan, I think, that he was talking about in the book, if I remember it correctly. But anyway, Sean Ripley, Paul Maynard, Darren Coxhead, Tim Margison, Carl Knox, Kendall Krause, Stephen Leslie, Don Meisner. These are all the captains in the Kentville Fire Department. It sounds like one of those biblical passages, you know, the begats, and they sort of drive you crazy. But I don't want to minimize, because each of these individuals, Mr. Speaker, really took time out of their busy schedules, time out of their life to help their neighbors. Walter Margison, Hugh Stronach, Paul Lawrence, Ryan Stronach, Bill Hunt, Danny Durling, Robert Spicer, Brian Kinsbury, Ian Fairclaw, who also works for the Chronicle Herald, Brian Saunders, Mike Ward, Ryan McEachern, and Mike Benjamin. All these people are officers with the Kentville Fire Department, all of them volunteers, all of them giving their time and serving the community, and serving not only the town of Kentville, but also helping out in the community of Kings as well. And in Kings, the warden, Fred Whalen, a good friend, an excellent warden, he was out there on that Monday with me in the riding, looking at the damage and trying to get some help and see what could be done. Bert Green, who's the EMO coordinator, the contact for the councillors, and who's the councillor in the area I live, a wonderful person. Mike Innes, the EMO coordinator for the County of Kings, and the administrative assistant, Kelly Lee, very, very active, and particularly, Mr. Speaker, Madonna Spinazzola, who's the councillor for the area that was hit most dramatically in the county, at least, by these flooding, Halls Harbour and the Meadowview area in North Kentville, which experienced much of the same thing that Kentville did with the flooding. These people really deserve credit. Madonna, I think, rose in council to congratulate me for the work I'd done, but I want to, in this House, congratulate her, because she really cared for the citizens. She got the citizens together that Wednesday, and the Premier came by to visit, and I want to thank the Premier for coming to my riding and met with these citizens, some of them really without a lot of financial resources, but working together as a community, and rich because they are part of a caring community. The Department of Transportation, Bob Barron, the area coordinator, and Alan Slack, who's the OS for my riding. Alan, I met him out in Halls Harbour, and he actually took me across, because the one bit of new pavement I got, Mr. Speaker, last year was going up the mountain. and it washed out, and I was heartsick. And so he took me, said, let's go take a look, and fortunately the damage wasn't quite as bad as it made it sound. And the Honourable Tim Olive, I want to thank him and the department, the MO. He took the opportunity to take a direct look at Halls Harbour, and the people in the community were quite excited about it. And so I want to thank him. Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, I have just a few minutes. The attention will shift on to other things, but my community and members of my community still have to deal with this. So we're planning benefits in the area to raise money to help out for the costs, and a poster with images of the flood, Kentville, and images of the flood, Kings County. These will be fundraisers to help people in the area. I'm at the printers right now, and if any of the honourable members want to buy one of these posters when they're ready, they're $10. All the money will go to help these flood victims. So I want to pass my time on now to my colleague, my esteemed colleague, the venerable colleague from Annapolis, who also wants to thank some people.
The Honourable, the member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't want my my colleagues here to applause too much because that would take away from my time at the microphone here. Anyway, it's a pleasure to rise, and I'm pleased to share my time with the member for Kings North. Last week, Mother Nature unleashed her wrath on Nova Scotia, and I was going to mention here that I grew up on a farm on the Annapolis River, but I guess I should say raised on a farm. Anyway, I experienced firsthand the problems with flooding on the Annapolis River as a child. On our farm, there used to be one spot in particular that would wash out every time we had a major flood. But anyway, this past week, the Premier called me and he said he'd like to come down the Annapolis Valley and do a visit and visit some of the sites. So I was very pleased that he did that. It showed that he was caring and compassionate for his fellow Nova Scotians. One thing that I would like to mention, I'd be amiss if I didn't say that, we were joined on our tour by Reg Ritzie, who's a councillor for the municipality of Annapolis Royal, and he's also the Emergency Measures Organization Coordinator for that area. Anyway, we made a tour down through Middleton, and we stopped at the bridge in Middleton, Highway 10, that had severe flooding the day before. And I must mention now that by the time we arrived, a lot of the water had receded. We then proceeded to Brickton and visited Mr. Todd Roberts. And Mr. Todd Roberts runs a service center there, fixes vehicles, does body work, that sort of thing. Anyway, the water was about 3 to 4 feet inside his shop, and he had considerable damage. Anyway, we then continued on our tour, and we were met by, or I should say joined by Mr. Phil Milo, who's also a councillor with the municipality of Annapolis County. And Phil was very concerned because these people were within his district. So we then proceeded to the Lawrencetown area and drove down along the bridge there by in back of the store, I think it's AJ's Grocery in Lawrencetown. And then proceeded on to Paradise, Annapolis County, to the farm of Jack Pearl. And I must mention, as we were traveling across the Annapolis River, we ran into a former colleague, I shouldn't say colleague of mine, but some members of this house, Mr. Laurie Montgomery, who was the MLA prior to myself. Anyway, we went on to Jack Pearl's farm, and Jack and Marie were there, and very pleased that we took the time to come by and visit. And it's interesting to note that Jack Pearl is the chairman of the stage committee for the Annapolis Valley exhibition. And Jack is responsible for the stage. And the amusing part is that the stage is in 4 sections. Probably I would probably estimate 15 feet by 15 foot square. All 4 sections of the stage floated down the river. And guess where they ended up? In Jack Pearl's back field, 3 miles away. Anyway, I also had an opportunity yesterday to visit some damage on the 101. My wife and I went down to the Legion in Annapolis Royal. They were having their 75th anniversary. And drove down the 101, and there were sections of the 101 washed out. Then proceeded down to what they call the Dugway Road, where the grist mill is, and the bridge is completely gone there. It's probably dropped about a foot or two, and the clerk from the clerk of the legislature here would be very familiar with that because that's in his area. Anyway, I'd just like to say that the Minister of Natural Resources, by bringing forth the information that he has that there will be assistance for flood victims it's very encouraging because there are a lot of people out there that are devastated. In fact, I saw pictures today from Mr. Gary Wagner who is also in my constituency, showed pictures of his house, and the water was within a foot or so of the window. In fact, there were pictures that I had seen last week of water coming through the windows of a newly constructed house. Anyway, Mr. Wagner, he'd suffered severe damage, but apparently he's able to live in his house again, but apparently during the peak of the flood they had to rescue him with a boat, he and his dog. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I would say that this is probably the worst flooding I've seen in over 50 years, and that's not an indication of necessarily my age. It may have to do with the pictures I've seen over the years. Anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention was the excellent work that's done by the municipality of Annapolis County and their emergency measures organization, and in particular Reg Ritchie. And I'd like to make special mention of Reg because he's been a councillor for several years, and he's done an excellent job.
Time has expired.
Thank you,
Honourable
Mr.
member
Speaker.
for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's ironic that both the previous speakers referenced the issue of EMO and EMO preparedness in the province of Nova Scotia, because that's essentially the topic that I wish to focus on here today. Mr. Speaker, as we all know and acknowledge, we live in sometimes dangerous and troubling times. You know, we remember 9/11. We remember not so long ago, a little more than a week, you know, the flooding situation, and who knows what else may come. And although we're a small province in a country that for the most part works for rather than against peace and conflicts around the world, we must agree with the Mayor of Canso, Mr. Frank Fraser, when he said in a Mail Star article dated March 22nd, 2003, that, quote, because of the Iraq situation, the terrorist stuff, you don't know where an emergency is going to take place, unquote. And Mr. Speaker, that's the plain truth of the matter. We really don't know where or when a terrorist attack may occur. The Office of Critical Infrastructure Protection and Emergency Preparedness, OCPEP as it's better known, which is the federal office coordinating responses to emergency situations, informs us gravely in their recent alerts and advisories that Canadian interests could be at risk due to their proximity to potential U.S. targets. Other warnings that came from that same office identified the fact that water supplies, banks, critical infrastructure such as electrical power generating plants, computer systems, and highways and armed force bases would be major targets for any terrorist in Canada. That same office also identified the fact that some sensitive information, such as the location of major infrastructure facilities, is best left out of the public domain, especially when that information allows a terrorist or deviant to gain knowledge of a potential target without having the need to physically access it. Mr. Speaker, in an OCPEP information note entitled Security Publicly Available Information dated the 31st of May 2002, the agency makes it abundantly clear that when releasing sensitive information to the public, security professionals must determine if that said information could be used to increase the attractiveness of a target, unquote. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the case. Said information should not be released. Therefore, it would not be very prudent to release Nova Scotia's most read newspapers and on television and radio the name of communities or any community which is the least prepared of all Nova Scotia municipalities to deal with an emergency situation, whether it involves natural disasters or a terrorist attack of some kind. Neither would it be wise to release a virtual scorecard of all the 52 municipalities of this province, listing their preparedness from excellent down to poor. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of information that only serves to, in the words of the same OCPEP federal document, quote, increase the attractiveness of certain target towns and cities in our province, which may not be able to respond to an emergency as it would occur. It's obvious that such information would make fascinating and useful reading for any potential malcontent determined to cause harm. And yet, Mr. Speaker, here we have a copy of the Mail Star dated Saturday, March 22nd of this year, in which we find exactly that kind of sensitive information printed that OSIPEP warns against releasing. Mr. Speaker, you have to ask yourself why. Why would any minister of the Crown compromise the safety and the well-being of the communities that are most vulnerable in this province? Look at Canso. Look at Goldboro, where we have vital infrastructure, the offshore. Look in Stellarton. Look in Glasgow, the county of Pictou, power plants. Mr. Speaker, was this simply a question of the minister wanting to get his name in the paper to create the optics that he was doing some good for the province of Nova Scotia and that he was on top of the situation? Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's ill-advised to put politics ahead of the security issues of this province. Had the minister responsible for EMO consulted with his federal counterparts or any of his other provincial counterparts before making such a proclamation, he would have been well advised to stay out of the newspaper with the type of advertisement that he put forth. Mr. Speaker, it lacks of the type of leadership at the ministerial level that's required to protect this province. Mr. Speaker, clearly this attempt to garner publicity compromises our community's securities. If anything, Mr. Speaker, it's a clear demonstration that the minister obviously doesn't grasp the significance of releasing sensitive information such as this. It's ironic, Mr. Speaker, the minister himself is quoted in the Mail Star as saying, quote, things have changed since 9/11, and the people have to recognize that, unquote. Well, if that's the case, Mr. Speaker, why is the minister exposing the people in these communities across Nova Scotia in such a vulnerable state? Mr. Speaker, and yet the government will come out and say that it's concerned about the leak of information from various municipalities on water and sewer projects and any discussions that may take place in in-camera meetings. Now, what's more important, Mr. Speaker? You have to beg one to wonder what in the name of heavens is going on over there. Why is politics being put ahead of the security of this province? Mr. Speaker, the minister would be well advised to take heed of his own words. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, even on emergency funding for this, for preparedness in this province, as I've stated a little earlier in the House, we are the only province in Canada, including the territories, we are the only provincial jurisdiction that does not receive the full funding amount that's allotted, Mr. Speaker, under the JEP program. And Mr. Speaker, I will table this document. In fact, Nova Scotia has shortchanged itself by over $100,000 because it simply didn't ask for the money. Why is Nova Scotia the only one that's not receiving at least the base amount of $150,000? It's the only one. Why? If the minister is so concerned about helping municipalities in these communities, why isn't he banging on the doors in Ottawa and saying we need this money? Why isn't he putting the application in? Why isn't he writing a letter or going and visiting with the federal authorities and doing something about it, rather than trying to glorify himself in the Chronicle Herald to make the government look like it's on top of emergency situations? There's a big difference, Mr. Speaker, between taking the responsibility as Minister for EMO in its true form as opposed to the politics of it. And that's all we've seen to date. We've seen the Minister of Transportation and Public Works stand here today and say, well, we're going to come up with $12 million. We've identified $12 million worth of emergency situations because of the flooding. Well, Mr. Speaker, they siphoned off $9 million out of housing programs that the federal government provided to this province. Federal taxpayers' money. And they're siphoning it off and squirreling it away like they did on the government readjustment or reorganizational program, like they did in Sydney Steel with the cleanup of the tar ponds. They booked the same dollars year after year after year to make it look like they were doing all this work. So for 4 years, they booked the same amount of money, Mr. Speaker. Well, I believe they may have spent out of $322 or $24 million, $6 or $8 million. Well, whoop-de-doo. And then they're going to come in, Mr. Speaker, and say they have a balanced budget and a surplus. They've been playing voodoo economics for years. And the Minister of Finance knows that. Of course, he was taught in the best of schools by John Buchanan School of Economics. Whoever was the last one to come through the door is the one he would give the money to. You know, and it didn't matter where it came from. He was just going to give it away. He gave it away until we're on the verge of bankruptcy. And successive governments have had to deal with that. The John Savage administration, the Russell McClellan administration, and yes, the John Hamm administration. So, despite all the posturing, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen is just shuffling the numbers around to make it look like they're doing a lot of new things. We heard the speech in the House. You know, the Prime Minister gave a response to the leader of the Reform Party about new old money. Well, this is a classic case, Mr. Speaker, of new old money. It's not new money. It's not new old money. It's not old new money. What is it? They don't know. They can't tell us. All we know, it's not their money, and it's really not Ottawa's money, even though Ottawa is supplying the money for them to take the credit. It's the taxpayers' money, the people of Nova Scotia. And what does the member from the King's North say? We're going to sell posters or King's West. I do apologize. The previous speaker. Hey, they're going to sell posters to raise money for flood victims. Where's the provincial government on this? Where's the real leadership, Mr. Speaker? They're going to go around and have bake sales. Well, they should have learned about bake sales and fudge sales. They couldn't balance the budget on a fudge sale, for heaven's sake. They haven't been able to do it in 20-some years, Mr. Speaker. So my question is, why are they standing here trying to ingratiate themselves with the people who have been hard hit because of the floods across Nova Scotia? They don't want to be patronized by the eloquence of people that can stand and speak, you know, with these $10 words. They're not interested in that. They want to know, Mr. Speaker, what the government is going to do to help them. And the government has been wishy-washy on this. Lots of tours and tour guides. Oh, yes, your land is underwater, and yes, your bridge has been washed out, and yes, your home has been adversely affected, but they really haven't said what they're going to do. They're going to wait to see what the insurance companies are going to do. They're going to wait to see what kind of responsibility the municipalities are going to take on, Mr. Speaker. And yes, let's look at the environmental side of the issue. The member for Kings North has touched on it. The oil spills in the valley. How is that going to adversely affect the domestic water supplies? And what has the Department of Environment and Labour, and indeed the minister responsible for EMO, done about it? It's a good chance for him. I'm sure he'd love to get his picture in the paper again.
It seems like he's more concerned about that than he is about helping these people in need. Mr. Speaker, I'm kind of disappointed. Mr. Speaker, that the government hasn't really been able to address this issue in a more substantive manner. That $12 million wouldn't even count for or address the issues in one community in Colchester County. If you go into Truro, that $12 million would barely cover the damages, let alone everything else across this province, Mr. Speaker. So I would submit that we need real leadership, not talk. Thank you.
Order, please. The time allocated for debate going into supply has expired.
I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call the estimates of the Minister of Health?
Thank you. Is the Minister ready, or does she need a minute for her staff to? Sure.
We didn't say a word. Shoot the messenger. I can tell in your eyes if you can you put that on the record?
I recognize the Minister of Health. We'll start
Thank-
debate at 5:46.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first, I'd like to introduce the staff here with me today. They're going to help me through this slim briefing book here. Cheryl Doiron, our Associate Deputy, and Byron Rafus, our Chief Financial Officer. I think all members of the House have met them before. Dennis didn't hear very well. Before we get to your questions, I would like to take a few minutes to set some context for this debate. In simple terms, our budget is about building. It's about building on the progress we've made in government, building on our efforts to improve Nova Scotians' access to better, faster, more reliable care. As members of this House know, I recently released Your Health Matters. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first plan to address Nova Scotia's health needs. In fact, over the past 10 to 15 years, there have been many others. But there's a big difference between this plan and those that have been released in the past. First, this government, unlike others, has the collective will to ensure our plan doesn't just collect dust. Second, our plan will work because it is focused on the needs of people, not the needs of the system. And I can say this with confidence because Your Health Matters isn't just government's plan. It is a plan shaped by the nurses, doctors, and health professionals who know better than anyone how to improve patient care. I want to publicly recognize and thank all of our health professionals for their tremendous commitment and attention to the health and healthcare needs of Nova Scotians. In fact, many have been planning and working with us since 1999. Moreover, this year's budget once again demonstrates we've supported this work with continuing strategic investments. Let me identify the highlights of what we have achieved together and what we plan to do to make sure that Nova Scotians from one end of this province to the other have access to better health care. Mr. Speaker, perhaps our greatest success has been in our efforts to train, recruit, and retain more nurses. Between 1990 and 1998, the number of nurses graduating each year dropped from 333 to 86. In 1999, this government increased funding to enroll 75 more nursing students each year. As a result of this effort, the number of nurses who graduate this year will be more than double what it was in 1998. A good start, Mr. Speaker, that we will continue to build on through this year's budget. Beginning in May, 60 more nurses will be trained in each of the next 4 years, and these nurses will be educated in innovative ways. For example, some will complete their training in a shorter time, so they are out of the classroom and at the bedside more quickly. As the president of St. FX said, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, "This funding announcement for nursing has been greeted with much acclaim and pride. This is surely good for Nova Scotia, for the universities, and good for nursing. This innovative proposal and government's substantial support of it will serve as a prototype for the rest of the province and universities." End quote. Mr. Speaker, opening up more training seats is just one of the efforts we have undertaken to ensure Nova Scotians have the nurses they need. Through our comprehensive nursing strategy, developed by nurses themselves, we are providing bursaries to nursing students and licensed practical nurses. We also introduced a new pay-for-work cooperative learning program. It began in 2001, available to 60 nursing students. In this budget year, we are doubling this number to 120. Mr. Speaker, our efforts to encourage nurses to make Nova Scotia their permanent or new home are working. In the last year alone, 113 nurses have relocated to Nova Scotia. In fact, I will table Nova Scotia's nursing strategy update completed by the Provincial Nursing Network and released in March of this year. This update reflects the $10 million commitment we're making this budget year to support the nursing strategy. I know at least one member has a fascination with nursing numbers, and I'm sure he will want to replace the press releases he uses with the most recent successes reflected in this update. Our efforts to recruit more doctors are also working. Over the past 4 years, Nova Scotians have benefited from a net gain of 199 doctors. Mr. Speaker, that means Nova Scotians are gaining, on average, a new doctor every 2 weeks. As outlined in your Health Matters, an additional 8 medical students will begin training this year, and we will train 22 more medical laboratory technologists. Mr. Speaker, let me take a moment to briefly touch on areas where Nova Scotia is not just leading Atlantic Canada, but the entire country. Nova Scotia is the first province in the country to guarantee stable, predictable funding for frontline hospital care. We are providing a 7% increase for our district health authorities and the IWK Health Centre in each of the next 3 years. That's a cumulative increase of $124 million. And this is on top of the additional and substantial spending to cover the DHA's and the IWK's new wage and salary pressures. Mr. Speaker, by providing our hospitals with guaranteed multi-year funding increases, we are ending years of roller coaster decision-making and ad hoc planning and patient uncertainty. By providing our hospitals with guaranteed funding, we are guaranteeing patients greater certainty that the services they need and count on will be there for them and their families. In a nutshell, more funding, predictable funding, will lead to better planning, better management, reduced wait times, and better patient care. This is just one example of how we are leading the country. Mr. Speaker, here are a few others. Nova Scotia became the first province in Canada to introduce standards for the diagnosis and treatment of people requiring mental health services. Nova Scotia became the first province in Canada to develop standards and protocols for the diagnosis and treatment of osteoporosis. We are leading the country when it comes to modernizing the collection and sharing of medical information in ways that benefit patients. We are leading the country when it comes to emergency response services. In fact, we have one of North America's most advanced air and ground ambulance services, an often overlooked but critical component of an integrated, well-managed healthcare system. And, Mr. Speaker, I would certainly credit previous governments in the 90s for much of that initiative. Mr. Speaker, we are a national leader in telehealth services, with a sophisticated video conferencing system that, with the touch of a few buttons, makes a specialist at the QE2 or IWK available to any doctor or any patient in any hospital in Nova Scotia. In the areas of cancer care, through Cancer Care Nova Scotia, diabetes care through the Diabetes Care Program of Nova Scotia, and cardiovascular care through Nova Scotia's ICONS program, our province is demonstrating new leadership in helping Nova Scotians better manage and better control disease. And, Mr. Speaker, we are also leading the country in another area that may surprise some members opposite, According to data from the Canadian Institute of Health Information, we spend less on administration in Nova Scotia than any other province in Canada. And I will table this document for all members that paints this picture. This, of course, highlights why we have added staff over the past several years, particularly in our seniors programs and in areas where we are responsible for managing and overseeing our $2 billion healthcare system. But even with these strategic investments in staff, Nova Scotians want us to be administratively lean, and I am pleased we lead the country in this area. Mr. Speaker, we are also doing what we can when we can. This budget includes $33 million to help our seniors live independently, to help them better manage the high cost of prescription drugs, and to help ease the financial cost of nursing home care for both seniors and their families. Of the $33 million, $18.1 million has been added to long-term care. Almost half this amount will be used to protect the assets of seniors and to begin reducing their contribution towards nursing home costs. That's the medical cost of nursing home care, Mr. Speaker. This commitment this year will reduce a senior's contribution by approximately $4,600 per year. Just today, I shared with seniors and all Nova Scotians our plan to build on this important step. To recap, Mr. Speaker, seniors will pay less toward their nursing home health care costs every year until they eventually pay only for room and board. When this point is reached, government will consider income only and stop considering assets when assessing seniors' ability to pay. This point will be reached no later than April 1, 2007. We will spend $40 million to make nursing home care the most affordable in Atlantic Canada and as affordable as it is in Ontario and the West. Even more significantly, seniors will be able to keep and pass along to their children and family the assets that they have worked for over their lifetimes. This year, government has balanced its investment in reduced nursing home costs with investments to support other programs that benefit a greater number of seniors. Mr. Speaker, this includes an additional $9.7 million to freeze the seniors' pharmacare premium and copay, as well as to cap the copay at a maximum of $30 per prescription, a suggestion put forward by the Group of 9 that government was pleased to accept. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time, I want to briefly mention a few final budget highlights. An additional $10 million will be invested in ways that will reduce wait times for tests and treatments, beginning with cardiac care. Will this budget make a difference in wait times, Mr. Speaker? Every member on this side of the House knows the answer. But if the other side of the House would like a second or third opinion, listen to what Blaise MacNeil, the CEO of the Southwest Nova Health Authority, had to say on Information Morning last week. First, Mr. MacNeil said the district's CAT scanning equipment and support for their new bone densitometer program means that significantly fewer people in his district will have to travel to Bridgewater or Halifax for service. Then Mr. MacNeil said, and I quote, "The fact that the department has invested in programs like cardiac care, which is a great concern to us, will mean that the queues will be shorter and that people will have more access." End quote. His colleague Don Ford in the Capital District had this to say: "This investment will significantly reduce wait times and have lasting benefits for patients and their families." So, Mr. Speaker, quite simply, Nova Scotians won't have to wait for our plan to shorten wait lists to kick into action. Approximately $2 million will be provided to train more nurses and doctors and to provide bursaries for paramedics and medical laboratory technologists. This will reinforce our efforts to shorten wait lists. As well, Nova Scotia will make good use of the federal money provided through the Medical Equipment Fund. Just as we have in the past, every dollar of the $15 million will be used to purchase more and better medical equipment and to provide more specialized training. Again, an investment that will shorten wait times for tests and treatment, as well as improve access to services for people no matter where they live in Nova Scotia. In total, the budget to support doctors, nurses, health staff, and to improve patient care will increase by more than $119 million. Mr. Speaker, I would like to wrap things up with a point that surely will be met with universal agreement among all members of this House. Namely, Ottawa is still a small player when it comes to ensuring Nova Scotians, indeed all Canadians, have access to a universal, affordable, and publicly funded health care system. While we welcomed the new money recently announced through the federal-provincial accord, Ottawa's contribution to national Medicare continues to fall far short of both need and expectation. For example, the $75 million federal signing bonus would maintain our healthcare system for 13 days, a far cry from what Commissioner Romano requested and what this government would have expected.